my name is Dr. Pooja Patel. I'm a health psychologist, and in this module we'll be covering how to have conversations around mental health. We'll cover what brief interventions look like to engage people more opportunistically and empathetically in conversations around mental health, well-being, including financial well-being as well. So what is important when having conversations around mental health? It's really important that we have key or good listening skills. So there are different levels of listening. So we have cosmetic listening, conversational listening, active listening, and deep listening. So cosmetic listening is when we look like we're paying attention, but actually our mind is somewhere else. So we're thinking about the dinner that we're making that night. We're thinking about our weekend plans. So we're not actually quite in that deep end of that conversation. Then we have conversational listening. So we're getting slightly deeper here. So now this is when we're engaged in the conversation. We're listening, we're talking, we're asking questions, but it's not quite active listening. Active listening is very much focused on what that person is saying, which also goes hand in hand with deep listening. So deep listening is when we're really committed to understanding that person's perspective, and we're more focused on them than we are on us. So what does deep listening look like? So this is deep listening. Like I said, it goes hand in hand with active listening, and it might be things like maintaining eye contact, expression of body language, and maybe reflecting that back to someone. So really being engaged in that conversation. We might paraphrase, or we might summarize and reflect back what that person's just told us. That really helps us to give us a sense that someone's actually listening to what we're saying. We're very much focused on the speaker. We accept silence. Sometimes it might feel quite uncomfortable, but actually silence allows someone to think about what they're saying and even give them the opportunity to respond to that. It's about creating a space for that other person and holding their emotion. So we should allow people to feel their feelings and validate those feelings. It's very real for them. And we can do that by suspending our judgment and being empathetic. It might also be about asking open questions. So we should let people freely answer, but asking open, curious questions really helps to open the dialogue. And the more curious we are, the more we tend to ask those open questions. What it's not is interruptions or interrupting, indifferent body language, so looking away or texting while someone's talking to us. Making statements that feel quite judgmental. We try and avoid asking closed questions, but sometimes there is an opportunity for closed questions as well. Like I said, we want to avoid judgment and offering our opinions too much. At this point, we're just listening to people. We're really trying to understand their point of view. So I'm just going to share with you a couple of slides on why sometimes it's difficult to have engaging conversations with someone, especially when we're trying to get them to do something and they're just not taking the sound of our advice. So this is when we've received unsolicited advice. So this is unwanted advice. And we've all probably been on that receiving end of it, if not that giving end of it. So for example, you're trying to encourage someone to, get a job. Well, have you tried Tesco's or Lidl for work? Just give the council a call. They should be helping you. Why haven't you stopped eating the junk food at night if you want to lose weight? So it's that unsolicited advice where it's not really helpful and it's not really welcome. And when we receive this, we enter something called the threat zone, or the threat zone is triggered. And we might come back with counter arguments. We might feel demotivated. We might feel angry. We might feel more stressed. And that's because this threat zone is a evolutionary response to threat. So just think about what it feels like when someone's given you unsolicited advice. What we want to do is get people to a contentment zone. So when we want to support someone in making some change, some positive change, we want to get them into the contentment zone. And what we know is that 17% of information is retained when we're in the threat zone. So that's that unsolicited advice. But 60% of information is retained when we're in that contentment zone. And that's because we feel safe and we feel ready. So we really want to get people to that contentment zone. And in the next few slides, we'll demonstrate how to do that. Sometimes we give some unsolicited advice because we care. So it's usually because we care. It's, our friends come to us with a problem, our siblings come to us with a problem, our children have come to us with a problem. And we want to give them a solution. And we give them a solution because we care. And this is known as our righting reflex. So this is our natural desire to fix things and give people the solution when they're in need. But what we know is that if the solutions or ideas come from the person themselves, they're much more likely to make that change. It's much more sustainable over a longer period of time because it's come from them and it works for them. So it's really important for us to be aware of this righting reflex. Are we jumping in too quickly with solutions, or are we really stopping and listening to actually what that person's really telling us? So here I've got one example of what someone said, and I just want you to think about how you might respond to this person, but being aware of that righting reflex. So I'm trying to get fitter, but even walking to the shop at the corner gets me out of breath. I'll give you a few seconds to just think about how you might respond to this person. Just remember, we're not trying to give unsolicited advice, and we want to be aware of our righting reflex. The second example is, I don't want to keep drinking, but the stress is getting to me and it's the only way I can relax in the evenings. So again, just think about how you might respond to this person, but being aware of that righting reflex. So based on the previous couple of examples that I've shown you, it'd be interesting to assess whether you have tried to fix the problem or tried to ask an open question to kind of widen that conversation. If you've tried to fix the problem, that's your righting reflex jumping in. If you've tried to affirm them or you've tried to ask an open question, then that's a better way of getting people into that contentment zone. We also want to think about what empathy is. So just a question to you all, what colour dress do you see here? And just note it down. I see a white and gold dress, but a lot of people see a blue and black dress. And the reason we're showing you this dress is, you might be seeing this as a blue and black dress or a white and gold dress, or some people might see a lilac and baby blue dress. And I understand and accept that that's your point of view, and hopefully you understand and accept that I see the white and gold dress and that's my point of view. And that is what empathy is. The key to being empathetic is being a good listener, being curious. It's about uncluttering our own minds and being more curious about the person that we're speaking to. It's really important to remember that we don't have to have the answers and the solutions to everything. In fact, it's about showing the person that you actually just hear them and understand them. So it's really not about having the solutions to everything. And there are key attributes of being empathetic. And the first one is see the world as others see it. So really trying to step into their shoes. be non-judgmental, understand that other person's feelings and perhaps even validate those feelings, and communicate the understanding or that conversation. A key way of expressing empathy is through reflective listening. So reflections or reflective listening is about giving accurate feedback to the speaker around what it is you think they are saying and meaning, which helps to increase their sense of being heard and understood. And for us as practitioners or as frontline staff, or as people working with the community, it's a good way of us sort of checking in to make sure that we're understanding that conversation correctly. Sometimes it's about taking a guess about around what the person has just said, rather than assuming we know. And if we're incorrect, that person will correct you. So, for example, I understand that it's been a really difficult period for you. No, that's not what I meant. What I meant was that I'm just frustrated today. That's one example of taking a guess at what the person means, rather than assuming that we know. It's usually a statement and not a question, so we try and avoid comments, opinions and advice. Although sometimes it can feel like a question, so they might respond to your reflection, and that's okay. There are different types of reflections, so we've pulled out 3 here, from more simple to complex. The most simplest form of reflection is repeating or rephrasing, so really staying very close to what the speaker has just said and substituting some words or phrases. Then there's paraphrasing, which is probably one that we use the most, because this is when we formulate someone else's words into our own, but the meaning is still the same. And then the most complex form, or the deepest form of reflection, is reflection of a feeling. So this is when we really emphasize on the emotional aspects of that communication through feeling statements. So this is that deepest form of listening. So for example, it might be when we can read someone's body language, or when they've sighed in a conversation, or they've taken a long pause. We might reflect that back and say, you sound really frustrated, or you sound really upset. So that's that deepest form, or that most complex form of reflections. So it's important that we try and use these within our conversations. They can be done, used periodically, but it's a really good way of making sure that we're showing empathy, and we're really trying to understand and really actively or deeply listening to that conversation. So earlier we talked about unsolicited advice, but there is a way that we can give advice opportunistically, which really helps people to get them into that contentment zone that we talked about earlier. And one simple tool that we can use is the PAPA tool. This is a really simple tool, 1 to 3 minute tool that you can use when you come across an opportunity to support someone with advice. So when you really want to jump in with advice, try and resist that writing reflex. But if you feel like you need to impart some solutions because that person is stuck, then we can use something called the PAPA tool. So this is permission, ask, provide, ask, and it can be done within a 3-minute conversation. As frontline professionals, we often have that strong desire to impart solutions and help people solve their problems. We can use this PAPA tool as a way to impart some solutions without pushing someone to do something that they're not comfortable doing. It's a way to engage a conversation and get the other person to think about some of the kind of the solutions that you're bringing to the table. So the first part of this is asking permission. So asking for permission is key for building trust and rapport. It emphasizes personal choice and control, and it helps people to feel safe and respected. Just wanted to also point out that at first it might be quite awkward to ask for permission, but it becomes more natural with practice. P is for permission, asking for permission. So for example, would you like to talk a little bit more about mental health, or would it be okay for me to give you some information on money advice services? At this point, the person might say no, in which case we don't push. So that's really important. If someone says no, we don't push that conversation any further. If they say yes, then we can move on to the ask bit. So this is where we might ask around what they might already know about the topic. This not only adds to your understanding of where they are kind of going with their self-management, of their condition, for example, if it's mental health, but also identifies any gaps in knowledge, allowing you to give more kind of meaningful information and not really repeat what they already know. So we can ask those open, curious questions here. Tell me a little bit more what you know about mental health services in your area, for example. Tell me what you know about mental health in general, for example. And then we can provide. So again, where it's welcomed, we can provide tailored information based on what we've just heard. So this is when we kind of focus a conversation on where your patient has some gaps in knowledge, perhaps around mental health services. This is also an opportunity to reattribute any kind of unhelpful beliefs your patient might have, or that person that you're working with might have. So yeah, we can provide that tailored information. And then we ask again for the second time. So at this stage, you can kind of gauge that person's reaction to the information that you've given them, whether they've understood it and what you can do next. You can ask them what this information means to them, or how they will use that information. So this final ask is really about translating that information into action. So now that we've talked about mental health services, how do you feel about me signposting you or me giving you more information? How does that seem to you? And then we can kind of summarize that. So that's the PAPA tool. We've got it in a different format on the next slide. This PAPA tool to kind of signpost them or give them information in a way that's kind of not putting too much pressure on them. Some top tips then. Where possible, use those reflective listening skills. So especially when they've done something in the past that's worked, we can reflect that back so they've heard it twice. It helps us to express that empathy. Try and use open-ended questions as well. It really encourages the other person to do most of the talking, and we can capture most information that way. When raising a topic, try and keep it generic and try and avoid relating the topic to the person themselves. So for example, would you like to talk a little bit more about debt management? Not would you like to talk about your debt management? It just tries to keep the topic a little bit more generic and adds less pressure to the conversation. And just remember that writing reflex. We're not trying to fix anything. We're just trying to get people into the contentment zone. And we're trying to, we might be trying to even signpost or give them the right information so they can make the decision for themselves.